Imagine sitting in church, listening to a man preach about righteousness, love, and the consequences of sin. His voice is powerful, his words full of conviction. You trust him. You admire him. But what if that same man, the one standing at the pulpit, was hiding a secret so dark, so twisted, that he was willing to kill to keep it buried? A respected California pastor. A mistress carrying his unborn child. A scandal that could destroy everything. And a desperate, ruthless plan to make sure she, and the baby, never lived to expose him. Faith can inspire, uplift, and bring people together, but it can also blind you to the truth. What happens when a man who claims to be God's messenger is actually living a double life? When his carefully crafted image is threatened, does he repent, or does he erase the problem altogether? Pastor Elijah Graves had a choice, and he didn't turn to prayer. He turned to murder. Welcome to Everyday True Crime, where we bring you the most shocking and twisted cases you won't believe actually happened. If you think you've heard it all, just wait, because this story will leave you questioning just how far someone will go to protect their secrets. Make sure to like this video, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notifications, so you never miss a case as jaw-dropping as this one. Elijah Graves was a respected man in his community, a pastor known for his powerful sermons and unwavering stance on morality. His congregation admired him, his wife stood by his side, and his reputation was spotless. To the outside world, he was the embodiment of righteousness. But behind the pulpit, Elijah was living a double life. For nearly 2 years, he had been having an affair with Amira Lawson, a 29-year-old woman who believed she had found true love. What started as a private mentorship quickly evolved into something forbidden: late-night meetings, whispered phone calls, stolen moments that blurred the lines between right and wrong. At first, their relationship was thrilling, a secret they both indulged in without thinking of the consequences. Elijah told Amira everything she wanted to hear. That she was special. That he had never felt this way before. That one day, things would be different. But as time passed, the dynamic shifted. The romance that once felt exciting became something dangerous. Elijah grew distant, avoiding Amira whenever he could. He was careful, ensuring no one in his congregation suspected a thing. Meanwhile, Amira struggled with the reality of their situation. She had fallen for a man who would never truly be hers. Amira Lawson had been feeling off. She had suspected she was pregnant, but she wanted to be sure, so she bought the test. She stared at the 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test, her heart pounding. A rush of emotions flooded through her: excitement, fear, love. This was it. This was the moment everything changed. She had been in love with Elijah for so long, caught in the shadows of his double life, but now, there was no more hiding. She imagined telling him, the way his eyes would light up, how he would finally see that they were meant to be together. She imagined a future where their child would bring them closer, where he would choose love over secrecy. But when she finally told him, Elijah Graves did not react the way she had hoped. His face drained of color. His jaw clenched so tightly she thought it might snap. And then, in a voice that barely sounded like the man she knew, he asked the one question that shattered everything. "You're going to get rid of it, right?" Amira's stomach twisted. She blinked, thinking she had misheard him. "Elijah, what?" His hands gripped his head as he paced the room, breathing hard. "Amira, you don't understand. This can't happen. If anyone finds out, my wife, the church, my entire life." He turned to her, desperation in his eyes. "You have to end this." A sickening chill crawled up Amira's spine. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "This is our baby. I'm not getting an abortion." Elijah exhaled sharply, his hands trembling as he grabbed her shoulders. "Amira, think. I have a family. A congregation that looks up to me. If this gets out, I lose everything." Amira yanked herself away from him, her heart pounding in disbelief. "So that's all this is? Your image. Your reputation. What about me? What about our child? He didn't answer. And in that silence, she knew the truth. She wasn't his future. She was his mistake. At first, Amira convinced herself he just needed time. He was in shock, of course, he was. She was too. The next time she saw him, she tried to soften the conversation. She told him how much she loved him, how this baby could be their fresh start. Elijah, this could be a blessing. Maybe we were meant to have this child. His jaw tightened. His fingers tapped anxiously against the armrest of his office chair. Amira, you're not hearing me. This is going to ruin my life. It's going to ruin yours too. You think people won't judge you? Call you names? You think my wife won't come after you? His voice lowered. She's not the forgiving type. That was the first time Amira felt fear, not just for herself, but for the life inside of her. But she refused to back down. She refused to believe Elijah was as heartless as he sounded. When he saw she wasn't budging, he softened, pressing his forehead against hers. Just think about it, okay? She thought about it. But her answer never changed. She was keeping her baby. By the time she reached her 4th month of pregnancy, everything between them had changed. Elijah barely returned her calls. When she showed up at church, he avoided her. When she tried to see him, his messages were cold and short. She was alone in this. And then, the pressure started. At first, it was subtle, hints in his messages. You know it's not too late, right? You still have options, Amira. But when she kept ignoring them, his desperation turned to something darker. One night, she woke up to a message that sent a chill down her spine. You're making a mistake. This baby will ruin everything for both of us. She stared at the words on her screen, her hands trembling. And for the first time, she wondered, was he trying to warn her? Or was that a threat? By the time she reached 7 months, the fear had settled in her bones. She stopped going to church. Stopped answering Elijah's calls. She had made it clear, she wasn't getting rid of this baby. And she knew, deep down, that she couldn't trust him anymore. Then, one night, she came home to find an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was $10,000 in cash. And a note. Leave town. Start over. Take the money and forget about me. Amira clutched the envelope, tears burning her eyes. He wasn't asking anymore. He was begging. But she wouldn't run. She was done hiding. And that decision sealed her fate. At 38 weeks pregnant, Amira was just days away from giving birth. Elijah knew he was out of time. And he would rather see her dead than let the truth destroy him. Amira Lawson had spent months fighting to keep her baby. Now, at 38 weeks pregnant, she was just days away from meeting the child she had fought so hard for. She should have been picking out baby clothes, setting up a crib, feeling nothing but excitement. Instead, she was walking into a trap. The message came late in the evening. Let's talk. One last time. Just you and me. Amira stared at the screen, her heart pounding. It was Elijah. She hadn't seen him in weeks, not since he'd left that envelope of cash under her door, practically begging her to disappear. She had ignored his calls, ignored his texts, convinced that if she just stayed away, he would have no choice but to accept reality. But now, here he was. Reaching out. One last time. Her fingers hovered over her phone. She should have said no. Every instinct told her to stay away. But some small, foolish part of her still hoped. Maybe he had finally come around. Maybe he was ready to be a father. Maybe, just maybe, he would choose love over fear. She typed out her response. Okay. Where? Elijah picked the place, an old, abandoned parking lot on the outskirts of town. Somewhere private, he had said. No drama. Amira pulled up, her stomach tight with nerves. The baby kicked inside her, almost as if warning her. The lot was empty, except for Elijah's car parked in the farthest corner. He was already outside, leaning against the driver's side door, hands in his pockets, staring at the ground. As she stepped out of her car, he looked up. And for a brief moment, she saw something in his eyes that made her hesitate. It wasn't relief. It wasn't regret. It was something much colder. Something final. She forced a smile. So, what did you want to talk about? Elijah let out a breath, shaking his head. Amira, you have to understand. I can't do this. Her stomach twisted. What do you mean? The baby is coming, Elijah. It's happening whether you like it or not. He closed his eyes, rubbing his temples. You don't get it. This will destroy everything I've built. Her blood boiled. Your image. Your reputation. Is that really all you care about? He took a step toward her. You don't understand what's at stake. She squared her shoulders, refusing to be intimidated. I understand plenty. I understand that I'm keeping this baby, with or without you. His eyes darkened. You can't. She took a deep breath. Watch me. And then, something in his face changed. The pleading was gone. The desperation had vanished. What was left was pure, silent decision. She saw it, just for a second. And in that moment, she knew. She had made a terrible mistake. The first blow came fast. A sharp, brutal strike to the back of her head. Pain exploded through her skull as she stumbled forward, the world tilting. Her vision blurred. Her ears rang. She barely had time to process what was happening before she felt his hands around her neck. Strong. Unforgiving. She gasped, clawing at him, trying to push him away. Elijah, please. But he didn't stop. His grip tightened. The baby inside her kicked wildly, as if fighting, as if knowing. Darkness crept in. Her strength faded. Her legs buckled. And then, nothing. Elijah stood over her body, panting. His hands trembled. His heart slammed against his ribs. It was done. She was gone. And now, he had to clean up the mess. The first thing he did was take her phone. He powered it off, wiped it clean, and tossed it into a nearby drainage ditch. Then, he dragged her lifeless body to his car, shoving her into the trunk. Every second felt like an eternity. Every sound made his nerves snap. But he couldn't stop now. By the time he pulled away, there was no evidence left behind, just an empty parking lot and a silent car waiting for an owner who would never return. Elijah drove for hours, taking back roads, avoiding cameras. He had already planned this part. There was a river deep in the woods, a secluded spot no one ever went to. By the time he reached it, the sky was pitch black, the air cold and silent. He pulled her out of the trunk, his breath fogging up in the night air. The weight of her body was heavier than he expected. Dead weight always was. He dragged her to the edge of the water, his heart hammering. Then, without a word, without a prayer, he let her go. The water swallowed her whole, taking her and the life inside her to a grave they never deserved. And just like that, she was gone. Elijah got rid of everything, the clothes he wore that night, the gloves, the weapon he had used to hit her. Preached his Sunday sermon. Smiled like nothing had happened. But when Amira's family started asking questions, when the police got involved, when her abandoned car was found with no trace of her inside, that's when his perfect life started to crumble. Amira Lawson was not the kind of woman to disappear without a trace. She had been counting down the days until she met her baby. She had a hospital bag packed. A car seat ready. A name picked out. There was no way she would have just walked away. Her family knew that. And when her phone calls went unanswered, when days turned into a week with no sign of her, they knew something was terribly wrong. It was Amira's sister, Nia, who finally went to the police. She sat in the station, her hands clenched together, her voice shaking. She wouldn't just leave, she told the officer. Something happened to her. The officer took notes, nodding. When was the last time you heard from her? Nia swallowed hard. She texted me the night she disappeared. She said she was going to meet someone. Who? A pause. Then, in a voice thick with anger, Pastor Elijah Graves. That changed everything. The officer's pen stopped. Your sister was involved with him? Nia nodded. She was pregnant with his child. That was enough to escalate the case. A young, heavily pregnant woman had vanished, and the last person she was in contact with was a powerful man with everything to lose. It was time to start asking questions. When detectives knocked on Elijah's door, he didn't seem surprised. He stepped outside, rubbing his temples like a man carrying the weight of the world. I was expecting this. Detective Aaron Mathis studied him carefully. You were. He sighed. Amira's family never liked me. I knew they'd blame me for this. Blame you for what, exactly? Elijah let out a tired chuckle. For leaving. For cutting ties. Detective Mathis leaned in slightly. When was the last time you saw Amira? Elijah didn't hesitate. It's been weeks. I told her we couldn't see each other anymore. Mathis tilted her head. So you haven't spoken to her? Elijah shook his head. No. She took it hard, but I had to do what was right for my family. It was a good performance. Concerned. Regretful. But firm. If they hadn't already been suspicious, they might have believed him. But something about his answers felt too neat. Too rehearsed. So they started digging. And the deeper they went, the more his story fell apart. The first red flag was the text messages. Investigators pulled Amira's phone records and found something chilling. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Elijah had been relentless. You need to get rid of it. Think about what this will do to my life. We can fix this, but you have to listen to me. Then, the tone shifted. You don't want to make me do something I'll regret. Detective Mathis stared at the screen, her stomach twisting. This wasn't just a man panicking. This was a man threatening her. But the texts were just the beginning. Next came the security footage. Detectives traced Amira's last movements through surveillance cameras. And there it was. Elijah's car. Parked in the same lot where Amira had told her friend she was meeting him. The timestamp? The exact night she vanished. They invited him to the station for questioning. When confronted with the footage, Elijah's cool demeanor started to crack. I don't remember being there. Mathis pressed. You don't remember being parked at the same place Amira Lawson disappeared? He stammered. I must have stopped there for something else. But they weren't finished. Because then, they found the receipts. Days before Amira disappeared, Elijah had made several purchases. Plastic sheets. Gloves. Industrial-strength cleaning supplies. Rope. Mathis slammed the file onto the interrogation table. Care to explain this? Elijah paled. There was no explanation. No excuse. It was the shopping list of a man preparing to make someone disappear. And now, he had run out of lies. The call came in just before noon. A frantic voice on the other end of the line. I think I found a body. The dispatcher's fingers flew across the keyboard. Where are you, sir? A deep breath. A shaky exhale. Near the riverbank. I was fishing, Anne. Oh, God. She's just lying there. By the time detectives arrived, the area had already been taped off. The smell of damp earth mixed with something far worse, the stench of death. There, half submerged at the edge of the river, was Amira Lawson. Her body lay twisted, tangled in the reeds. The current had tried to pull her away, but the rocks and debris held her in place. A swollen belly, still. Silent. Her skin, once warm and full of life, had taken on the sickly gray of death. One detective turned away, swallowing hard. He had seen plenty of bodies before. But this? This was different. The coroner's office was quiet when the findings came in. Strangulation. A slow, deliberate act. Someone had pressed their hands around her throat and squeezed, long enough to snuff out every last breath. But the worst part? Her baby never even got the chance to take one. 38 weeks. Just days from being born. A life taken before it even began. Detectives sat in stunned silence. Elijah Graves had spent years preaching about God's love and the value of life. And yet, he had murdered his own child. Not in the heat of passion. Not in a fit of uncontrollable rage. But in cold blood. To protect himself. To erase his mistake. He had taken 2 lives, and thought he could get away with it. But now, Amira had been found. And justice was coming. Elijah Graves sat in the interrogation room, hands cuffed, eyes hollow. The weight of his sins had finally caught up with him. Across from him, Detective Aaron Mathis laid out the evidence, the text messages, the surveillance footage, the items he had purchased to cover up his crime. And now, the final, damning piece, Amira's lifeless body, pulled from the riverbank, along with the unborn child he had been so desperate to erase. He didn't speak at first. He barely moved. But when he finally did, it was only to shake his head, muttering under his breath, "I had no choice." But the law didn't see it that way. Elijah Graves was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder, one for Amira Lawson and one for the baby who had never taken a breath. His congregation, the very people who had once looked to him for guidance, were left in disbelief. How could the man they had trusted, the man who preached about faith and morality, be capable of such evil? Some refused to believe it, clinging to the idea that it had to be some kind of mistake. Others were sickened, betrayed in a way that cut deeper than words could express. When the trial began, Amira's family sat in the courtroom, faces set with grief and determination. Her mother, overcome with emotion, clutched a framed photo of her daughter, the young woman who should have been holding her newborn in her arms, not lying in a cold grave. The prosecution laid out the case with brutal clarity, painting a picture of a man who had spent months trying to make Amira and the baby disappear, and when he failed to convince her, he took matters into his own hands. His defense team tried to argue that he had acted out of panic, that fear of losing everything had clouded his judgment. But the jury wasn't swayed. The evidence was too overwhelming, the crime too calculated. The messages he had sent, the threats he had made, the methodical way he had disposed of her body, it wasn't panic. It was murder. When the verdict was read, the courtroom was silent. Guilty. On both counts. A sob broke out from Amira's mother, a sound of both relief and sorrow. Justice had been served, but it would never bring back the daughter and grandchild she had lost. Elijah Graves, once a man of God, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The pulpit where he had once stood, delivering sermons on righteousness, was now nothing more than an empty stage. His flock had scattered, his reputation was ruined, and the only future he had left was a prison cell. F.O. Power. Lies. Betrayal. A man who was supposed to lead people to salvation instead led them to deception. When his secrets threatened to come to light, he made the ultimate decision, to silence the truth forever. If this case shocked you, there's more where that came from. Subscribe to Everyday True Crime for more disturbing cases that prove you never really know what someone is capable of. And don't forget to like this video, because stories like this deserve to be told.